Hello everyone, I'm George Kenner. I'm an industrial arts addict. I've been working for years to set up the perfect shop out in my garage, and I think I almost got it. I jumped into 3D printing and I wanted to design some of the items for my shop myself. Introduction Fusion 360. The problem that I had was I could only find point and click tutorials on YouTube. I lacked the basic function of why this program was developed. I reached out in a Facebook group for some paid tutorials. I got taken advantage of. Someone from India offered me tutorials at $15 an hour. I thought, well, why not give it a try? Before I could take the first lesson, it was going to cost me $130. Well, they got me for $15. I went back into the group and shared what had happened to me. And Swami, the instructor in the course that you're about to watch, offered to take me through the process and the background of Fusion 360 for free. This introduction is going to be on all of the tutorials, each one slightly different. The first one is going to start at the very basics of why it was even developed and the learning process that you'll go through. This will be about a 4-hour college course. Swami is very good. I asked some nonsensical questions. Maybe they'll benefit you, maybe they won't. But this course will give you the very foundation that I was looking for. It's not point and click. Again, it'll be the same introduction for each one of the courses. Swami's contacts will be placed down in the description should you want to have them. Of course, I'd love to have you join me in my pursuit of the industrial arts on my channel, but that's not the reason. Swami was nice enough to give this to me, to give everyone a better understanding of why Fusion 360 and how to use it. There's a lot of little jewels in here.
Perfect.
Now, when you hover over them, they're going to tell you body, face, edge, and component. Let's do edge again. So not only do you have them at your quick ready, you also get an indication with that little check mark. If you did it the way we did it originally, which is fine, you might not remember the priority you had set. This way you get a little visual feedback here. And the caveat is, remember to go back and redo things if you have to. Because if you set that list and then you start clicking stuff and you say this program sucks, it won't let me select something, it's because you forgot to turn them back on.
Yeah.
Yep. Let's go back into that area. We're going to do one more thing in here. We have window, freeform, and paint. 1, 2, and 3.
Okay,
So let's see what that means. So the default is going to be a window enclosing. So if I want to select everything here, I can start up here on the left and click and drag a giant window around everything.
Okay.
And let go. And at the bottom it says multiple selection. And that is going to be a box select window. If I go the other direction, it's going to be different. If I go right to left, it just needs to cross. So this way shows me an orange fill with a solid border. I go the other way, it shows me a yellow fill with a dash border to let me know something's different. So they're both box. One is box window enclosing. The other is box crossing. Just has to touch them. And it's just going to depend what you're up to as to what's appropriate. Now, we had hotkeys. Go ahead and hit numeral 2 on your keyboard.
Number 2?
Yep. numeral 2. Now, when you click and drag, you get a little lasso, a freeform.
Okay,
And again, if you go one direction, you get everything has to be inside. The other direction, it just has to cross. So this might be appropriate on a cribbage board where you have pegs going and you want to choose that pattern, that curvy thing of the pegs, and it doesn't nicely fit into a rectangle. The last one is numeral 3. And now when you click and drag, you get a little box, and this is just paint, whatever you go over top of. That's numeral 3 on your keyboard.
now what does it do?
It's paint. Numeral 3 is
Paint?
just click and drag, and if it touches it, it selects it. You could also do this on the cribbage board where you could follow the holes or the peg holes or whatever.
Okay, so right now with that number 3, your select is on select is in selection priority or selection filters, it's select all, correct?
I currently have select all.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be select all. Those 3 modes are independent of select all filtering or not.
But see,
So-
I didn't, I had the other selection on, which was like the line selection. So when I put it on and ran over with the boxes, it was only doing the lines, not all of it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you were still in, you were still in edge, you were edge filtered.
Yeah, in a way, what I did was I was confirming my own problem.
So
my
this
own
is good. This is a good distinction.
Yeah, I
You
found my own solution. You're going to be able to see doing tutorials here next week.
So you have separate but related things.
Yeah,
One is the selection mode. The other is the selection filtering. Right? So they're separate things, but they're related. They're all about selecting. One tells you, am I boxing, lassoing, or painting? And within those, am I totally enveloping it in a
Mhm.
window, or am I just crossing?
So
That's all your selection mode.
how do I get rid of number 3, the box?
Let's not do that yet. So you got 3. If you come up to the top, you'll see your icon is indicating paint. There's a little paintbrush.
Oh, okay.
Now hit 2 on your keyboard, and it's hard to tell because it's kind of whatever, but now you have a dashed little loop.
Yeah.
And now hit 1 and you get a dashed rectangle.
Okay.
So 1, 2, and 3 is setting it to the box, which they call window, but I call it box because some programs call window specifically for going around everything
Yeah.
versus a box that's crossing.
Okay.
And then number 2, they call free form. Sometimes they call it lasso. We're making a loop around something. And number 3 is paint. You just drag across it, you paint across it.
Perfect.
One last thing inside here. We're not going to go over all of them, but if you open it up, there is a selection here called an area called selection tools.
Okay.
And the only one I'll note here, you can go back to the other ones later, is down here near the bottom, invert.
Okay.
Sometimes it's easier to select what you don't want and then invert to get what you do want.
Okay.
Just depends on the situation.
Okay.
All right. So here's one of the last things we're going to do in selections. I'm going to go and filter out for edges with our newly promoted to the toolbar
Okay.
priorities here. I'm going to select this edge and I'm going to shift select to add that edge. It says 2 edges now.
Okay.
If I right click, I can save those into a container, a set. Right here it says create selection set. Click that one.
Okay.
And all the way on the left, it has added a new folder container called selection sets.
Okay,
If you open that up, you see an item inside it, default name. And in those brackets, it says I have 2 items selected in this set. The first icon to the right will select them. And the next one will update your selection. So if you click away in nowhere space, you now have nothing selected.
okay,
And if you hover over here and you do the first icon, you have reselected them.
okay,
Now here's the real value. This is the big value. If I'm in a fillet and I'm selecting edges that I want to fillet,
mm-hmm,
I might have a lot of edges and it might be difficult to select them. There are ways we can do stuff to do it, but let us say we have a lot of little edges and we have no convenient way to select them all. We have to click one at a time.
okay,
If I misclick, I lose my selection. If I hit Control Z to undo, I think I'll undo, I'll get my selection back.
mm-hmm,
No, it takes you out of the feature altogether and you're further back.
okay,
So the workaround, after I did that a couple of times, I said there has to be a better way. I will click, 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 and then I will make a selection set. And then I will add to it. Click, 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 and then update my selection set. And then add, click, 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 update. Click, 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 update. And then if I misclick, I only lose that last little bit of effort.
okay,
So being efficient, effective, productive involves knowing the system and knowing the tools and knowing how to get around in things so that you're working optimally.
gotcha,
Yep. So these are really handy. I use these all the time. I use these all the time. And then you have that long click and hold. If I do a long click and hold, I'm going to get, let me turn off that guy here and do here. There's one face, and that's the face underneath. I
okay.
click it, you can see it underneath. I selected it.
So you, instead of taking the bottom, you took the top, instead of taking the top, you took the bottom.
Right. So I could have orbited underneath and got at it,
Uh-huh.
but sometimes it's easier just to see through.
Now, I know what you did, but I lost the control. How did you do that again?
Make sure you don't have anything filtered out.
Okay,
Hover over the center here. And just click and hold. It's like we did in the sketch mode.
oh, okay. Click
And
and,
again, it's the indicator in the selector. If you hover, it indicates which it was. And then you click it, you select it, and you can tell it's the underside face.
okay,
If I hover over this edge and I long click and hold, I get those 2 faces and that edge.
mm-hmm,
Yep. So the more crowded your scene gets, the more important it is to understand these ways of getting at stuff. So that is all good. And a bunch of and there's a few things we left off, but you know where they are. And this is all dependent on doing good underlying structure, good practices, so that all of this stuff works together in a very nice way. I think that is all of the select stuff that I wanted to cover. So we have gone through the beginning, all of this, all of this, all of this, all of this, some of that, all of that. We looked at the undo list, selection filtering, selection modes. We are down to this last little chunk. So as a preview, and I'll keep going, as a preview, inside of Sketch, we have important stuff for construction reference. We have important things called projected, bringing in geometry from elsewhere to help us. In the timeline, I'm probably gonna do that before those. Some ordering of our timeline. The coloring that you noticed earlier, we can pick that up. Making things see-through, isolating. So we're going to do those things and then we're gonna backtrack to the sketch stuff. Features groups, component color, etc. Okay, features groups. That's when we make another thing. Let me hold off on that. Instead, opacity and isolate. Okay. Well, I need to do all that. I need to do a new one. All right, we're gonna make another component. Now, importantly, we need to pay attention to what is the active component, because
Okay.
that's where new stuff goes. And we also got to keep track of when we do things. So here's a game we're gonna play, a series, a loop of things over and over. Let's go to the top of the timeline and make it active. By making the top of the timeline active, that allows us to see all of the actions in time.
Okay,
Go and make part one active. And you'll notice you don't see the creation of the component itself.
okay,
We're only seeing stuff inside the active component and subcomponents.
okay,
So this is a good reason, one of the reasons to make components. So go all the way to the back and make it active. So here's the game we play. First, we make the top active so we can see all of time. Then we decide when do we want our next action to happen. In this case, we want it at the end of time. And then we decide where do we want it to happen in our tree. We want to make another part, and we want to make it at the same level as our first part. So we want to have the top active. So that's the game. Make the top active so we see all of time, decide when, decide where, and then do our action. And
okay,
then when, where, action, when, where, action, again and again. All right, so we're gonna make a new component called part 2. So that's Shift C. I can hit Tab. And that takes me up into the name. Anytime you don't have to move your mouse, you're generally gonna be faster. And I'm gonna make this one part 2. And hit Enter. And by default, you can change that, but by default, it makes it the active component. And now we don't see anything in the timeline because there's nothing in this container yet.
okay,
Let's zoom back out a little bit. We're going to do a little rectangle off to the side here in the same way we did this guy. So it's going to be a quick review. So you should be able to hit R for rectangle. Hover and make sure you're getting the ground plane. Go ahead and make a little sliver rectangle here. Hit E for extrude. And then drag it up. We get a little gizmo for dragging and tapering. That's the positive direction. And hit Enter.
so R for rectangle.
R for rectangle. Now that ground plane is hidden by the puck, so you need to do that outer select thing.
Okay, oop. So then,
Just make a little thin rectangle like that, or whatever.
and I go, what, we're still working in minus, right?
No. You hit E for extrude and then just drag the little blue arrowhead up.
Okay,
We're gonna do it graphically, visually.
now, it's giving me degrees. I don't want my degrees to change.
That's the taper.
Yeah, that's a taper. So, but I,
Look in the box and make it 0, or drag that little arc thing with the circle. So your gizmo controls are going to control various things like the distance and the taper angle in this case.
so I went up 30.
And then you drag it up.
And I
And
got
when you're,
it up, so I have,
that's fine.
I have a rectangle sitting next to my circle.
Yep, and you hit enter on your keyboard to complete it.
Okay,
We're gonna go home. And we're gonna save. All right, now we are going to change things, and we might have to change some setting on yours or not. By default, I put a different material, a little lighter colored. Mine is lighter colored and I can see the black edges better.
Okay,
Yours is a little darker. The default material is a little darker. We'll change that eventually. But the important thing is we now have two components, part 1 and part 2.
okay,
On your keyboard, hit Shift N as in Nancy, and colors will change.
yeah,
This is called component color display,
okay,
and it's a toggle. If you hit it again, you go back to the default appearances.
Control N. Oop, everything disappeared.
And Fusion lets you give things the same name, which is bad practice.
Uh-huh,
In Windows, it'll tell you replace or rename. In Fusion, it's happy to give it the same name.
how come I'm not, okay, so I have it open, I'm looking at my browser tree. I want to change the name of the file, maybe I need to do it here.
In the data panel, you change the name of the file. You right click in
I was
the
trying
data.
to change it in the data tree.
Yep, if you're in the data panel where you see all of your files, you right click and say rename.
I called it advanced training.
Oh, excellent.
It was between advanced training and oh shit.
Maybe it's both.
Okay, so now I go back to Shift in on the, and then Shift in. That gives me my colors.
And at the bottom of the screen in your timeline, if you have part 2 active, you only see that color, that bar.
So in my history, I have red, like a pink, a yellow, a pink, and a blue.
What is your active component
So my active component,
in the tree, which has the bullseye?
so they,
You have 3 choices, part 1, part 2, or root,
okay, so
which is active.
active, okay. So active training is the highlighted, it's got the little bullet in the box, the little,
Yeah, the bullseye.
the bullseye. So
Which
now
one is
if I
which
go
one is active?
part 1, now it gives me blue and green. And if I activate part 2, then I have yellow and blue. But do all of the colors go on at the same time? I mean,
Go to the very top, make the root active, then you see everything.
okay, and when I go to the root active, it makes them 2 shades of blue.
Very well. You can play with those a little bit. You don't have direct control, but you can cycle them. You can
Okay,
change them. Now, we're in the component color display mode, so they're giving colors.
okay,
Each of our guys, our puck and our slab are different colors. We're at the very top of our tree active, the top of the tree. So we're seeing everything in our timeline down here.
gotcha.
The color above is the component. And in the tree, the little vertical bar is the same color.
Okay,
So that is another good reason to have components to show us, give us an indication quickly of what's going on. Now, these items from the beginning of time, part 1, the sketch, the extrude, and the fillet, they all logically go together, right?
okay,
And this next 3 here, they all logically go together. So let's group them. So we can start here at the beginning of our time where we have this part 1, click to select it. And
Okay.
hold the shift key. We're going to do a range. Hold the shift key and go to that fillet and click. And now all 4 should be selected.
okay,
And right click there. And near the top say create group.
okay,
And it's compressed it into this little group with a plus minus button.
Okay, so each one of them became smaller.
Well, they're inside that
Yeah.
group. And do
Exactly.
the same thing for the next three. Click there, shift click there, right click there. Dun, dun, dun.
So I'm creating two groups.
That's right. Two logical groupings of each component in this case.
Okay,
Now, with them collapsed, right click on the first one, rename, and give it something logical like part one. And you can do the same thing on the next one.
okay, so I think somehow I reopened it and lost that.
There's a little plus minus,
Yeah,
and the
So-
minus is closing, collapsing. The plus is opening, expanding.
okay. So then I write, how do I change the name?
Yeah, that's it. You right click and say rename. So right click is your friend. There are many places in this
Okay.
program and others where you get special menus when you right click. Then once you have played the renaming game, when they're collapsed, if you hover bottom up in time, it goes away, unfortunately. There's no way I've found to change that, but you have the group name, the first action, the next action, the next action going up.
Okay,
Now, here you have some little VCR controls, these little triangles.
okay,
The first one, hit that, that goes home, the beginning.
okay,
Do the last icon, that goes to the end.
okay,
And these other ones go one forward, one backwards. And this is play. So if you go back one step, you've actually gone back multiple actions because they're all grouped together.
okay,
And back one more step, we've gone multiple actions in one step.
okay.
Then if you expand one, now when you go forward, you're getting into the details of that group. So this ordering of your timeline is going to make it easier to understand, navigate, and edit. When you have them collapsed, you get the big picture.
Uh-huh,
And then when you open them up, you get the details.
okay,
And the comparison I make is like ancient Greek. There were no spaces or punctuation marks. You can read it. If you type English with no spaces or punctuation, you can read it. You have to look closely. It takes a little more time and effort, and you can make errors.
mhm,
But if you put spaces and punctuation, then you have made a better situation. So your timeline without features groups and without naming things is like a bunch of letters without any spaces or punctuation.
okay, on my screen, what I'm looking at the bottom is, part 1.1. It's actually yellow, and my part, the puck or disc is yellow. Then I have part 2.1, and I have the elevated. Okay, so now you got them, I got it. Now
Yep.
it's,
And let's make sure you had the correct thing active when you made this guy. Let's come up to our filters, a little review. We're gonna go to body. Right there, body priority.
okay,
Now on this body, right click on that extruded rectangle you made, right click
okay,
and say find in browser.
goes right down to part number 2.
Is it,
Yeah,
it's in the correct component
yeah,
on your side. Cool. And again, the viewport, the tree and the timeline all together in 3 work together so you can point from one to the other.
sure,
Cool. We found that, we did that. Coloring. So you don't have direct control, but you can cycle things.
okay,
So we have our components. Say component 1. if I go to the tree and I go to the component level at the top here and I right click, near the bottom, I can cycle my component color. And now it changed the color.
So
Right click,
again,
cycle component color. I'm changing just that one component color through some predetermined palette based on some conditions that we don't have control over.
okay, so if I go to part one and
Yep.
I hit on part one.
Yep, right click on the component.
Oh, cycle component color. I got it.
Yep, and then click away and it will have changed the color.
Gotcha.
Or click one component, shift click the other component and right click, and now you're going to change both of them.
Okay.
So if they're too close to the same shade or you don't like the color of it, you can play that game until you get something that works.
Okay.
You just don't have direct control over the colors. It's some palette. All of that, all of that, all of that. That's all good. I'm going to save what I got. Beautiful. Oh, caveat. Unfortunately, you cannot drag something out and you can't drag something in. It just doesn't let you do it. So you have to collapse it, select it, hit delete, hit enter, and recreate it. Moving stuff out or in and then recreating it.
Oh,
It's not a particularly good workflow, but you'll run into it. There will be times that you do stuff later that you want to include, but you can't drag it in. It won't let you do it.
mm-hmm.
I'm going to undo myself back to here. The other caveat is you can't put a group inside a group. You can't nest them inside each other. Some
Okay.
systems in grouping, it's possible. They either made a design decision or maybe there was something fundamentally. But whatever the case, you cannot have groups inside groups and you can't drag things in or out.
So there's no insertion, like if you're building something and you go, oh, I need to go back in there and put another, put a hole in that disc.
Well, you can do that. You can go back in, if you go back into the group, if I go back into this group, or let me do it into this one better yet. If I go back into this group and I want to put a hole in it,
Mm-hmm.
I can do that. And now I have the hole here.
Oh, okay.
I can do anything inside here, but if I come to the end of it, I can't drag that hole out. And if I made the hole at a time that was not in there, I couldn't drag that hole inside,
Okay.
or I can delete the hole. It's just it's an unfortunate, less than ideal user experience not being able to do that, but you can effectively do it.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing to note is there's something very special about 3D CAD in this timeline that you can't do in the real world. In the real world with clay, you push, you pull, you twist, and you get some final end result.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no history. You can't go back and change how much pressure, how much twist, add a different technique, take out a technique. You can't do all that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in 3D CAD, you're not making a thing. You're defining the actions in time to be something at some time.
Okay.
At this earlier time, I haven't even started to make that rectangle prism.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not making a thing. I'm making something at some time based on these actions strung together in time, one after another.
Okay.
So it's a very different way of thinking and doing that can only be done in a computer. You can't do it in the wood shop. You can't do it in your art studio with
Yeah.
clay. Yeah. And so this is why I'm cautioning people to avoid using that familiar square peg in the shiny new round hole.
Mm-hmm.
That fundamental thinking is different. And the things you do are likewise accordingly fundamentally different.
Okay.
But once you understand this system and the tools and whatnot, then you're off to the races. And then it's very playful. And then you can do a lot of what ifs, right? Because now, for instance, here, if I go to the end of time, I collapse this one down. If I right click here, I can temporarily disable it. I can say suppress. And now it's as though it never happened.
Mm-hmm.
If I open it up, they're all grayed out. Or I could do individual ones. So now I can have a base design and do a bunch of what ifs and turn those things on and off selectively.
Uh-huh.
So because the 3D CAD was designed with design and manufacturing of real world things in mind, it supports these kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas other modeling systems, their intent is different and they do things differently according to that design intent. So we got all of those, we got all now these guys, this sketch and that extrude, that sketch has to exist before I can do that extrude.
Mm-hmm.
If I can't drag, I can try. It looks like it's going to do it, but when I let go, it doesn't do it.
Yeah.
You can only drag so far back in the time dependency.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you can drag it far back and screw stuff up sometimes
Mm-hmm.
because there's some other dependency. So you have to be careful. But for the most part, if you do something here and later you do something here and even later you do something here, but this thing really belongs closer in time to this thing earlier, then just drag it back.
Okay.
And it will go back as far as it will let you go in time. And then now you have things more logically connected, grouped together. So the understanding and the management, the ordering of this timeline is another thing that goes a long way to making you more efficient, effective, productive, making things easier to understand, navigate, and edit. And lastly, so it processes optimally, doesn't take any more time than it has to.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't understand the system, you can point and click and do stuff, but you can also make a quick mess for yourself and hang yourself and do things really inefficiently.
Okay, so I want to take the box and I want to put it in the center of the puck.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. Yep. That's a good one. Let me unsuppress. So there are a number of ways that you can do this. Some are appropriate, some are not. Some are obvious, but are not necessarily the most appropriate choice. And I will explain that. That's a good one. It's somewhere in the rest of the things we have to do anyhow. All right. So we're looking at our two items here. I want maybe the bottom center of this to be on the top center of that, for instance, right? Here I am bodies. I can click and drag my body and then try to move it up and down and around.
Mm-hmm.
This is a poor choice for a couple reasons. If I turn on the sketch, you will now see surprising. Did not. Let me try and redo this. In general, that does not work. Oh, the sketch is moving with it. So that one you can move and the sketch moves with it. But what if, I know why, I come in here, this guy, I'm gonna do something I normally wouldn't do, but just to lock it down. Now I try to do this. It's going as well. I'm learning something here in a moment. This shows all the way over here to the right still. And yet I've moved it over here and it's showing it off to the left here.
Mm-hmm.
this is no longer in registration with where I made it originally. That's not a good thing. Right? Originally my rectangle was over here. And I extruded my rectangle up here. When I moved the body, this sketch got dragged with it here at this time or this place. But if I go back to edit it, it's still in its original place. Which is not a good thing. We've now taken things out of registration from where they started and where they ended up and whatnot. And I've never had to do that, so I've never encountered that problem. Let me undo myself back. So I go to my list, undo fix, undo drag. That, oh, it dragged the component. That did drag the body. I thought I had body, that's why. It dragged the entire component. All right, I see what happened. Let me go back. Here is my sketch under there. There's my body. Here's my component. I said body and I dragged it. But here it tells me that it dragged the component. And when you drag the component, the coordinate system goes with it. Now my local is not in line with the original world. My world is fixed here.
Mm-hmm.
So my sketch is still to the right of the local coordinate system. But that's because it dragged the entire component, even though I only dragged the body, which is weird. I normally wouldn't do that. And that's just doing body. All right, so that is a problem. Without understanding all the details, because I had to figure it out in a moment, the bottom line is don't do that. That's going to mess up your structure. You don't want to, in relocating and reorienting our things together, you don't want to mess with any of that good underlying structure.
Yeah.
And we just did mess it up without knowing it.
So,
So that's one way you might do it.
so let me see if I'm catching this. If I wanted to take and put a rectangle on top of that puck, then the way to have done it was probably got a centering rectangle and drawn it off of the 0 point,
That's one way.
joined them, and then elevated it. Joined.
So you can create stuff in place,
Mm-hmm.
right? If I come in here, don't do this, so just follow along. You make a new component. If I can make a sketch on this face,
Mm-hmm.
or I can make a sketch on this face. If I make a sketch on this face, then I can bring in this face. We'll cover this in a moment. There, that purple. I now have a reference on that face. And now I can make a diagonal. I can make a point at the mid point there. And say circle here. And now extrude that circle. And now they're in location and orientation like I might have wanted.
Mm-hmm.
So I created things in place by creating a sketch on this face, not on one of the coordinate plane faces, but on one of the faces of this object. And then I referenced some of this geometry so I could get a center point. And then I made my object, and then I extruded, and now I have these two things the way I wanted them.
Mm-hmm.
That's one way to do it. And it might be an okay way. It all depends on the use case, the situation.
Yeah, because we're only doing a hypothetical, it's not a real piece.
Yeah.
Like the thing that I sent you I only did that as like one component, thinking a component was the entire, um, and I don't even think I started off really with a component. I think I just did a sketch and started laying it out.
Yeah, and so that's a new user problem. You can do stuff that violates good practices. You can get away with it. You can 3D print and do stuff. But
Yeah.
again, you don't realize how poorly you're doing it and how much harder you're working and how much harder it will be to edit it and all the bad stuff that comes from not understanding
Yeah.
correctly.
Yes, yeah, I did, you know, I'll call it the tree of data knowledge.
Yep,
I
yep,
felt like, oh shit, just let's have leaves.
yep,
We
yep.
don't need no branches. We're just gonna have,
Let's go straight to the leaves.
yeah, we're going straight to the leaves.
Yeah.
We're not gonna,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah,
roots.
but
That.
yeah, if you don't have a good root structure, it falls over at some
Yeah,
point.
and that was what I was getting when I was watching this. It was like, you know, you're providing me the root structure, and
Yeah.
that's what's missing in all these tutorials and all the information that I was able to find at this point.
Yeah, yeah. And I reworked your file, by the way, if we have time and energy after this or whenever. I reworked your file per good practices and other approaches. And so compare and contrast, we'll see how your level of understanding got you to one place and how my level got me to another place.
Cool.
Um, so this is one way to create things in place. And if I move something, because that's projected in referencing some external geometry, it will move with it the way I want to. If I didn't do that projection, I just made it. One thing moves, the other doesn't know anything about it, and they're no longer aligned the way you want them.
Okay.
So you can do stuff that puts them in the right way in the moment,
Okay.
but if you don't pay attention to it, things will get out of whack later if you haven't done it correctly.
Okay.
So if I go back in time, all the way before creating this sketch, that new component. All right, so another thing people do that I recommend against, there are uses for this, but it can be abused, misused. If I do M for move, I get my move right there. And the default is move a body. And if I click here and I move this body, if I move this body, now you can see that it's no longer in registration with the sketch used to make the body. That's a bad thing. So you have a parent-child relationship analogy here. Wherever the parent goes, the sketch, the child has to follow,
Mm-hmm.
but not vice versa. The child can run off by itself.
Okay. So
So this is a bad choice in this case, because now you've taken those two things out of registration.
okay. So let's say I wanted to, I'm just theorizing here.
Yep.
Where we laid out the rectangle before we extruded it. I go back on the timeline, I take the extrusion out, and then I put the rectangle. I move the rectangle, I take any constraints off of it, and I put it onto the thing, then elevate it with a join command. That would work, right?
No joint command. You could do a joint, but you don't have to have them. I'm going to get to joints.
Okay.
Joints can be in place or they can be somewhere else and brought into place.
Okay.
Because you might have an external file like fasteners from a catalog with MasterCard or some linear actuator or something somewhere else in another file outside. You can bring that file in and there's no guarantee it's going to be in the right place or orientation.
Okay.
If you're in the same file, you can make them in place like the example we just did, and you do an in place as built joint.
Okay.
Otherwise, you have to do a more full system. So, so this is why move is not a good choice in this case. Couple reasons. Number one, you take this out of registration.
Uh-huh.
Number two, the default type here, the free move, it does not record this value 55.
Uh-huh.
If I say okay, and I go back to edit it, there's no value. I don't know what it went by. Now, if I undo that and I say M for move, and I choose this second one, and I move this one, And now I go back and edit it. The number is there. So without the number, it's not parametric.
Okay,
There's no parameter, there's no value set for it to go back to. Bad news. So it's not parametric if I go with the default. If I go with one of these, it is parametric. Neither way is it dynamic. There's no relationship built in between anything.
uh-huh,
So if you put them in the right location orientation initially, if something changes, there's no guarantee they're going to be the way you want them anymore.
okay,
So move has its uses. This is not one of them. If I come here, the other one, which is logical people choose, which is not good for some of the same reasons, is align. Right there. So I can say align body from, if I hover, it's going to find little snap points.
okay,
Maybe I want that bottom center to go to this top center. Say, okay, it's done it. That has got my design intent. I wanted that thing on top, center to centered. But I'm out of registration here. That's bad. And now, if I were to take this component and move it, what is going on? Why is it not letting me do this? Make sure my filters are all good. There. M for move. Component. Oh, it's locked. There's a little thingy there. That's a new thing to the program. Give me a moment. They redone something here. Move. Component. And I wouldn't do things this way. This is showing you why not to do it this way.
yeah,
There. Now this thing knew nothing about that thing. Now they're no longer lined up the way I wanted them.
uh-huh,
That's a reason align is not good, because it's not dynamic. There's no relationship established. They don't know about each other. So if one goes somewhere else, they don't stay the way you want them. Here is the feature. And if I go into it, I don't get any distances, any whatevers. I just see, oh, I selected these two things. But I don't have any indication how much I changed it by in this box. No values were recorded.
mhm.
Not parametric, not dynamic, not good.
So if I wanted a hollowed out shell and it was a sphere on the top and a disc, okay, would you make that, it's like you're making a cup without a handle. Would you make that one? Because you're gonna have to make the sphere, and then you're gonna have to make the, the cone or the pipe. Would you make that as one component, or would you do it as two?
It depends. I often make, I tend to decompose my design probably more than most people, not strictly necessary. But I like to have that level of understanding and relationship and control over my things.
Okay,
So I could make one component could be the container and the other could be the handle.
okay, I see.
And then even though they are one final object in the end, I have decomposed them because they have different roles. One holds the stuff and the other allows you to grab it,
Yeah,
the handle.
okay.
Now you can ultimately bring them all together to be one body if you want to,
Mm-hmm.
if you need to. But in 3D printing, you don't always have to. You can have separate things and the slicer will figure it out and you're
Yeah.
good to go. Yep. Or your handle is on a wok and you have to have a fastener to get your handle connected to the wok.
Yeah,
Now you have the wok, the handle, the fasteners, whatever, and
Sure.
those all are components. So you have to analyze up front your assembly, your system.
yeah,
What are the parts? How do they relate to each other? That determines your structure of your tree.
yeah. What I was kind of going for was the thought pattern you go through for establishing when to start a new component.
Yep. So I'll send you an outline of my design and modeling approach.
Okay.
And it's basically analyze the thing, figure out the relationships, the critical aspects, what's driving, what's driven,
Hmm.
go into fusion, make your tree. No sketches, no bodies, just make your tree.
Yeah.
Go into your table, make a few key parameters. Then start to fill them in.
Okay.
Only then do you start making your sketches and your bodies, because now you have an intentional structure where you've thought out the best you can ahead of time what those relationships are, and then you decide how to do it in the concrete in the model itself. And then if you encounter something you have to add to it, you have a better chance of being able to incorporate it and make a new component for it or something.
Okay.
So that's the approach. So one of the last things, because they're going to kick me out of here in a short bit. The way to actually do it is going to be with joints. And joints require that you get a body to snap somewhere on another body and to move in a defined way. And each component has to be in, each body has to be in their own component, because those components have their local coordinate systems. That's
Okay.
part of what's coordinating all of this. So to make a joint, you have a body in a component, another body in another component. You find snap points between the bodies and you tell them how they can move.
Okay.
And so that's what we're going to do. Now, at least one thing has to be anchored, grounded, so that it stays in place.
Okay.
If I associate these two things and I don't have one of them grounded, when I go to drag one, they both move away as a unit, and you don't want that.
Yeah.
So Fusion had automatically grounded this one for me. That little anchor,
Okay.
that one does not have an anchor. That has an anchor. If I right click, I can unground it, or I can ground it. It is grounded, anchored, and the parent is the root up here. See, that has multiple boxes, and this only has one box.
Hmm.
This is the end of the components. This one has components inside the component.
Okay.
So we're always looking at these icons to tell us what's going on. So we want to put this thing on top of here. So I am going to go assemble, and they're not as built, they're not in place. So I'm going to do this joint here. Going to turn off that sketch. It can recognize sketches. I'm going to ignore them. Okay. So now there's two tabs. One says motion. The default is rigid, but we have more. And as you go down this list, you loosen up more restrictions.
Okay.
Rigid is you can't move them, they're together. The revolve, revolute allows you to revolve. Slide lets you slide. Cylinder lets you slide and revolve like a screw, moving up and down and screwing, revolving. Then you get slot, plane, and ball. Ball lets you do all the three motion rotations.
Okay.
So if we go with the rigid and we go to our position, it's component 1 and 2 and the snap. So that one right there, if I come here and I hover, it's finding snap locations. And if one doesn't exist, you can make them. But I'm going to go in that little center right there.
Okay.
And now it's done it, one selected, and it's hopped me automatically down to this one. It's the active blue button. And then I come over here and I snap. And that little gizmo has a red, green, blue. It's little local little axis
Okay.
called the joint origin. So that blue is pointing up. And on the first one, the blue is pointing up.
Okay.
And the red is pointing this way, but the green is pointing the opposite. So it's going to sort of line up, but it's going to be rotated around.
Okay.
This game you have to play. This is a bit of the trick. And so we go to here, and then there, and we can't tell it's rotated because this thing is symmetrical, but we can flip. Oh, that flips this way. Flip. But now we have them sort of the way we want them. Like that. It had to be flipped in order for that to come out, right? So we got all of that. We can offset it if you had to.
All right.
We can also rotate it around the Z. Oops, that's not the one. Rotate it here like that. That will let me rotate it. So you can decide how you want this. And in the motion, back here, say, okay. And now this thing, I can't click and drag and move it because it is rigid connected to that guy.
Mhm.
And I can't click and drag this guy because he's anchored down. So without going into details, it depends on the use case. The way you decide which thing is going to be snapped and where to which thing and what motion is allowed depends on your use case. Am I making an engine with a piston going up and down in a head? Or am I making a pencil sharpener or something, right?
Mhm.
They're going to be different accordingly. Now, this one here is down here, made a joint, rigid, made a joint over here, rigid. And there's all kinds of edit stuff you can do. If I come in here, I could turn this into a slider. And now I freed some of the motion up. Now it's not rigidly locked. Now I can move it. So here, if I give it a maximum and a minimum, I can go here and say there and say there. And now this little animator says that's what I can do. And now I can move this up, but no higher.
Mhm.
And if I like that, I can capture that position. And then I captured it. But if I go before it, it's before I transformed it and captured it. So now I can do an exploded view and assembly instructions or something like that.
Mhm.
But the overriding thing is just dragging it had its problems. Doing the move command, which is kind of a logical one, it had its own problems.
Mhm.
And using the align had its problems. The most appropriate one, if we want our thing to be parametric and dynamic, then we want to use joints in an assembly.
Cool.
So it's not, if you break it down, it's not all that complicated. There are just a lot of considerations and factors and actions that you have to do.
Yeah,
So,
you've been invaluable. You changed my whole approach and thought process.
that's the idea.
I mean, I got it. I get it.
So let's do something in the last 10, 15 I have left here, and then 5 minutes for you to ask questions. There are a few things that we didn't get to, which we can, and they're okay. We've done the main value here. If I go and you sent me a file, it was a connector. I call it connector or something. So if I come in here and I go up alphabetically, and why aren't you moving? Please move. Okay, let me try this. There we go. Connector, vacuum, that's you right there. I'm going to save this. I'm going to get rid of it. So here is the one that you made. Let me make a copy of that so I don't mess with the original. We don't want to have the file with the same name, but deviate. That would be a bad thing. So I'm going to make this one a temporary that I know I can just play with and throw away if I have to. Uh-oh, why didn't you rename? Am I online? Yes, I'm online. Oh, it just didn't update. Okay, I'm going to open that one. So there's the one you made, and here's the one I made. One thing I will show in the moment, that any yellow or red you want to resolve. That's extra processing and it messes up stuff. we'll
Yeah.
talk about it more later. I just want to bring your attention to that. A lot of new users.
Yellow means holy shit, you did something wrong.
Well, if you have a circle and you extrude it and you delete the circle,
Uh-huh.
you get a yellow and it says, oh, I knew there was a circle there and I saved it off here, but you can't get at it and do anything with it. But at least you get the body that you extruded,
Okay.
which is not ideal because it has to process that warning and you don't have the control that you really want over it. So just bringing that to your attention. So very quickly, you have sketches, bodies, construction stuff hanging off the root. There's no tree structure here. There's no naming. There's no order in your timeline as far as grouping and naming and whatnot. It's just a string of letters. And there were a couple other things that were funny. In the one I did, I am able to show, here's my name views, and I can look at both of them. And I have shown both yours and mine side by side. I've shown a bunch of the dimensions, which I am now going to hide because they are going to get in the way, I think, of what I want to share in this last little bit of time. I wish there was a way to do more than one at a time. I don't know of a way to do that. All right, there. So here is a component with original by George. Here's a component by Swami. One thing you will notice here is I have fewer sketches. In this case, here. And I have my body. Here is your sketch and your body. All right, so one quick one. You made a bunch of circles and you extruded them up and did stuff. In mine, I did it differently. I made here, and then I did here, and I did here and here. I made this one sketch here, and I spun it around. I revolved it around this center.
Oh, yeah.
And not only is that simpler, it also gives you a better representation of your design intent.
Mhm.
Now I have here, I can see that I have an inner diameter here. I have an outer diameter here. I have a height here. I have a height here, this here, I have that there. It's much more clearly laid out.
Mhm.
When you did it with a bunch of circles, you had to make a bunch of circles, you had a bunch of extrudes, and the amounts are hidden in the extrude feature. You don't get to see them as readily as here. And then I went in and I made some parameters here, the bottom inner diameter, the bottom outer diameter, the height here, the whole an angle between things, the inner and outer diameters here, the heights lower and upper, lower and upper. And if I hover over one of them back here, that one tells me connector lower height, connector upper height, connector height. And this one is automatically forced. This is driven. This height in between here with the slant,
Mhm.
that's going to be this whole one minus these two leaves you with that one there. That's being driven. It automatically has to be based on these other ones.
Mhm.
And I made my groups in here and I named everything logically. You see, I have names for them. I have
Mhm.
names for all of this stuff. I am going to, I got 10 minutes. I'm going to still keep talking.
Okay.
I am going to pack some stuff up here. This is your turn to make any comments, suggestions where you want to go next with it.
So are you familiar with Lightburn?
I love Lightburn. Yes.
Okay. Now Lightburn has like construction lines you can use as reference points.
Yep.
How do I do that in this? I mean, I'm not expecting you to answer the question. I'm just saying,
Yeah, that was where, that was the construction and projection was one of the things we didn't get to.
yeah,
But as a brief preview, a construction line ends up looking dashed instead of solid. And it does not make shapes. It just is a reference to
yeah.
locate, orient other things.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And you hit X as in X-ray as the toggle on your keyboard, or you go to the palette and you tell the line type to change. This
Okay.
line right here there's three types. This one here, dash dotted,
Uh-huh.
that's a special one called center line. So I could dimension my full width diameter all the way across here, even though I only created half of it over here.
Mm-hmm.
There's no geometry. There's no geometry over here.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I have the full width dimensioned,
Mm-hmm.
the whole diameter, because I use my line type center line dash dotted. There's a number of reasons this is a nice thing to have in certain cases, especially cases where you have a surface of revolution.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you went back in there, if I take any one of these lines and change it to a construction,
Uh-huh.
it won't be blue inside anymore. It's not a closed shape.
Okay.
And I need a closed shape to do that kind of extrude.
Yeah. So I'm just curious, did you do any fillets on the inside?
I have not done any fillets anywhere yet.
No, but I see the little, it's a constraint that looks like a T. Right a bit.
It's like a key.
Yeah, like right there on the 90 degrees, those are constraints, right?
This is a perpendicular,
Constraint.
not 90 degrees perpendicular.
So the one that I did, I went in and filleted it so that it was more rounded because of airflow. But
Yeah.
it's no big deal. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
I didn't know whether that was a fillet constraint or a 90 degree
No,
constraint.
it's a 90. And if you don't know, you can always hover and whatever. Now, fillets, intuitively simple. But CAD wise, math wise, otherwise, there are complications with them.
Uh-huh.
In general, you do not want to put fillets in the sketch. There are a number of reasons we can address along the way.
Okay.
And just to know that even though it can be done and it logically makes some sense, and there are use cases where it's appropriate,
Mm-hmm.
in most cases, you want to do your fillet outside of the sketch on the body.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, it gets recorded down here, so it's a little more understandable, obvious what you've done.
Uh-huh.
If you do them in the sketch, it can also lead to downstream problems.
Okay.
So you generally want to do them on bodies and delay them as long as possible.
Okay.
Furthermore, if you apply a fillet inside a sketch where you've already applied constraints and dimensions,
Uh-huh.
it can remove them. It'll give you a little warning in the bottom right. It says, beware, you may be removing work you've already done. You don't want to undo.
Oh, okay.
So this is the finer points of understanding why, even though something seems logical, intuitive, and you can click and grab it and do it, it might not be the most appropriate thing if you have the full understanding of what's happening.
I hear you.
Yeah, yeah. So my overriding soapbox thing, among others, is sometimes it's more important how you think than what you think, and
Yeah.
getting that conceptual understanding is critical, because then that informs the concrete actions that you take.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, all I can say is thank you. I can't say thank you enough. I'm
Oh,
very
great. Well, your appreciation is my reward. Your success is my reward. And I'm glad that you've been very attentive, and you, to your credit, you follow along very well. And being that you really don't come from a technical background, but you've taken on a technical hobby,